Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It's my pleasure to have Joe Atwill back on the show. Joe, how are you doing?
Good, Tim. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for coming back on the show. Tonight, well, of course, you are, Joe is an independent scholar, researcher. He is the author of Shakespeare's Secret Messiah and also Caesar's Messiah, the Roman conspiracy to invent Jesus. His website is caesarsmessiah.com, and he also hosts the Secret Society Revealed, a weekly podcast. So, Joe, I was listening to your show, and I think the topic was preempted by current events, the missiles that our new president decided to lob on Syria a few weeks ago. But you and Jerry just briefly touched on an issue which is very interesting because one thing is very provocative, but it also requires, I think, further analysis. It's this concept of white privilege, particularly white male privilege, and let's say how it's largely a myth, particularly in the past couple of decades.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think a lot of statisticians have already done work on the claims that were made by the feminists in terms of employment disparaging because of gender. I don't know if you've ever seen any of this stuff, but in general, the you could show that you could put in it like some kind of particular variable like needing to leave your job basically for the length of time that a woman would need to recover from a pregnancy. If you put that into the equation of the sort of labor statistics and of employment and wage earning, excuse me, most of the advantage that the white male had just disappeared. It was just a question of basically different lifestyles and different educational levels, because at that time the white male was getting a better education. But that there wasn't this kind of structural fairness that people were talking about. This was a myth, and I think, at this point I'm not even aware of statisticians that argue that case anymore, because so much work has been done showing it wasn't true, but it had a tremendous amount of power. And it began this ball rolling, which ends up with affirmative action, which is both gender and racial promoting of non-white males, right? So, since affirmative action came into existence, there have been some state-level resistance to it. There have been a lot of lawsuits, and different states have passed laws. But the federal government continues the practice, and basically the philosophy of businesses just dramatically changed. And once the HR individuals started to realize that the affirmative action needed to get taken care of, well, the next thing you know, we have a kind of a structural situation that's permanent. So now. A lot of companies have, they have this, kind of bonus points if you're, a female, bonus points if you're black, so that basically you have to outperform to be a white male. It's very common. I don't have the statistics right in front of me. I was actually trying to get them this afternoon. I couldn't really get what I was looking for. They don't really publish them. I'm not even sure if they exist. But one thing that there is in existence is the health records, and these are so profound that I really hope everybody when listens to us kind of does their own research and not take my word or our word for it. I have been wondering about this for some time. I actually have seen, just in my own world, I've seen a lot of deterioration of the health of my peers. I'm going to talk about one individual at some point who just passed away. But I've seen this deterioration, and there are a lot of causes for it. But it is now been shown just to have a very clear statistical basis, because in 2015, two researchers, Ann Case and Angus Deaton, they produced a paper called Rising Morbidity and Mortality in Midlife Among White Non-Hispanic Americans in the 21st Century. And it was incredible because what they had done is they had simply gotten all of the death statistics for the different ethnicities and created graphs showing, well, how are everything working out. And what they found is that in the white male specifically, there had been a reversal of a long-standing trend toward longer life. And the reversal slowed down in like the 1990s and then actually turned like around 98. And you started to have a decrease in life expectancies. And this was really, really unusual. Okay, never, I wasn't aware of any example except perhaps during world wars where this had ever happened before. Because, you've had the trajectories based on hygiene and nutrition. So something was happening that was unusual, and these guys, the authors of the paper, the first thing they did was they wanted to see if this was happening to white males everywhere, and they compared U.S. white males in a graph to similar racial cohorts in France, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia, and Sweden, perhaps Austria, and found that they had continued through the entire period to track into longer lives. But in the United States, this wasn't the case. And so there were, they then went into the causes of death. Why are they dying? Why are the white males dying more rapidly? And what they found was that the misery index was highly represented in it. In other words, they found that you had suicide, drug and alcohol poisoning, chronic liver disease, and cirrhosis were all basically the increased causes of death. And so they actually have a graph in the paper which shows just an incredible increase, for example, in this so-called drug poisonings, alcohol poisonings, from underneath 5 per 100,000 a year to over 30. Just an extraordinary. But they also found very similar kinds of increases in suicides, chronic liver diseases. But lung cancer, on the other hand, was declining, showing that, the fact that people aren't smoking was, reflecting in these numbers. In the poisonings, the numbers are simply so tragic that it's almost, hard to believe. But in say 1990, you had fewer than 40 in 100,000 of poisoning, suicides, or liver mortality. But by 2015, it was over 80, over 100% increase. And the graphs are all headed just straight up. So you're clearly are not done with this demographic shift. And so, I, was curious as to what lay behind this sort of change in these causes of death. And it seems to me that the basic, if you look into the causes of death of things that are in the in this so-called misery index category, you have environmental changes, right? So what is it that has changed for this group? Well, you have a couple things. You have affirmative action has had an enormous impact on the chance for these individuals. And incidentally, the deaths were greater in non-college educated white males than for college educated. But even for that cohort, there was a dramatic increase in deaths. But it was greater in the those that didn't have college degrees. So and then of course you have had what I would regard as an assault on sort of the family and an assault on kind of the white male in general by the media. If you look at the white male in television and in movies, very often, not always, but very often, they're characterized as fools. The women are the ones who are clever. They go out of their way to make a joke about sort of the bumbling nature of the white male. And I think that, this is obviously deliberate. There's nothing that, in my opinion, goes on in the media, very little, that isn't basically understood as weaponized anthropology. So I think that, what you're looking at with these numbers, it reflects back to the topics that we've discussed in other shows, which is that the family was the target. That was the general goal of the secret society, right? Following World War II, the United States was triumphant. You would think that this group, the European Americans could look forward to a really spectacular 100-year run because of the privileged economic position that they held following World War II. All of the competitors had been laid to rubble. But that wasn't to happen, was it? By 1960, just, 17 years from when the boomers started getting born, you started to see that the culture was under, great duress. The idea of there going to be kind of this middle class paradise, where the ethnic neighborhoods would have peace and prosperity, that wasn't going to happen. Program after program came out of the federal government. Kinsey, he basically laid the groundwork for the federal government's taking over the control of the sexual laws, so that pornography would now be commonplace. That all of the various programs to basically move the ethnic neighborhoods into what can be called the great deracinated, white middle class, which would be, one step in the wrong direction, as far as the defense of culture was concerned. That was all going on. And then you can see, from these numbers that there was, things that were going to be bringing about increased drug use, and alcohol use. And so the mantra of sex, drugs, and rock and roll that the 60s generation adopted, was basically the formula for their destruction. They just didn't know it. And now, all these years later, we can actually look at these statistics as given in this paper, and you can see the real truth, that people are dying at an earlier age and that the quality of life has been dramatically reduced. Because, Tim, what you're looking at with these statistics is just the tip of the iceberg. What you're seeing is those that have succumbed all the way to the point of death, right? And there's so many of them, it actually skews the statistic. But this is the tip of the iceberg, because in back of this, there is a tremendous cohort of people that are miserable, that are alcoholics, that are drug users, that are financially uncertain, and it is from this huge cohort that you get these groups that then show up as statistics, of reduced longevity. So I'm really glad the paper is out. I hope everyone, particularly those who have children, white males, but women, need to see this too. You can see that there is just something that is really wrong inside our culture. And Tim, you and I have talked about this so many times. And it all really comes back to the same thing. I mean, these aren't accidental. This would be like claiming that, the Great Society's program destruction of the black family, the African American family in the 60s, was accidental or unintended. If that was the case, then they simply could have the statistics were absolutely crystal clear, and they could have changed direction and brought that whole destructive force to an end. But instead, they went forward, showing that there was an agenda, showing that the African American family was a target. And now here, with these statistics, you can see that that the white family was also a target. Because when you look at these statistics, and the authors are to be praised. I think these guys, I'm glad that someone is bringing this stuff out. But I don't think they did a really good job of considering cultural causes of these statistics. They talk about economic causes, which, they talk about things like the different natures of the 401ks between Europe and the United States, or, the economic insecurity that was brought about in 2008. But I mean, these are not strong candidates. I mean, when you look at these statistics, you're looking at cultural rot, and of a very, very clear and powerful nature. And so, the question is, what lay in back of this disaster, and what can be done about it. So, first of all, what lay in back of it, what do you think, Tim?
Well, there is a tendency for those people who to comment or to study these things to write it off as just a series of unfortunate events or natural corruption that sets in an affluent society. And the phenomenon of feminism was a function of prosperity. It's a revolution of rising expectations. Even Betty Friedan in The Feminine Mystique complained about boredom what vexed housewives was boredom, not surviving. And so, idle mind being the devil's workshop, what happens? And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, obviously, I think you said before, society has its own momentum, but there's a prime mover to these things. And I think the research has borne out that behind the scenes, there was a weaponized anthropology put into place at various levels. You mentioned Alfred Kinsey, and there was that had Rockefeller backing. He's legitimizing sexual deviancy in the 1940s and 50s, and this also coincides with the introduction of Playboy magazine in the mid-1950s, which some people think had intelligence agency backing. You have the Time Life empire promoting drug use, which you and Jan have done extensive research on, with the creation of the Deadhead. The Grateful Dead, it's known as an intelligence operation. There's speculation with the Beatles, of course, this broad cultural agenda, of the British Empire. The rise of feminism itself. Some people, again, I want to go back to feminism. It was obviously promoted by the foundations, by the government, by the education, institutions, by Madison Avenue, by Hollywood. Normal families were penalized by tax laws. You had the Great Society programs, which encouraged single parents, single parenting. That's, of course, 90% female. And the marginalization of the black male that was spearheaded by Gloria Steinem, a CIA agent. At this point, obviously there was high-level malfeasance at work here. They were in a position. The thing is, all the forces that were behind this were also in a position to change the macroeconomic environment to make it all that more difficult for the father to be the provider. That's, of course, the inflation of the 70s, high taxes, the introduction of debt to make up for debasement.
The introduction of welfare checks to replace
So, I mean, it's all there. It's you could, the deindustrialization of the United States is all part of the trilateralist agenda. And, of course, we've talked about before, going a little further back in the 1950s, you've had the Authoritarian Personality published by the American Jewish Committee in conjunction with MKUltra, CIA, that targeted the father, the Christian father, as the source for fascism in the United States, and needed to be targeted. And lo and behold, we see that agenda, over the next 50, 60 years played out, right before our very eyes. And it's hard to make the case that this is all just accidental. I mean, you have to be, you really have to believe in coincidence theory if you buy that.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. The AJC focused on sort of the European in general. And I've read it, and they didn't really focus on the father per se, though they did have, there was a lot in there about, kind of the male in the head of the family. If you actually go through the paper, it's just sort of such crazy stuff that I doubt if anyone's actually read the whole thing, tip to stern, but you can sure read the conclusion where it talks about that in order to prevent, authoritarian personalities or ethnocentric personalities, that we were going to need to organize all of the psychological sciences. They actually say this, we're going to organize them all into a mass scale program, and we would then use eros rather than in fear and intimidation to bring it about. That the democratic propaganda would be driven by eros, and then of course you get to see Eros and Civilization by Marcuse, and Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, and the Grateful Dead coming out of basically MKUltra and the CIA. And so now, the program that they had suggested has come into existence, to the extent that, they were directing it. It's unclear, but it just seems impossible to escape the conclusion that this was basically a strand that led into the MKUltra project, because so many of the same individuals appear in the CIA-related activity, and also in the Macy Conference, and then back to the AJC, where you had basically the whole Frankfurt School being employed for some reason. Anyway, all those things are kind of, I'm not sure to what extent the listener can follow all that, but it was an overall project that basically was there to crush Christianity, I would say, in a general sense, to make it less effective culturally, to make it less threatening, so that it couldn't really organize itself into something that could basically threaten. And so, we had all of these programs come into effect. We've now been living with them for 50 years. And, it's almost unsurprising to see these dramatic statistics about, increase in suicide, increase in alcoholic and drug overdoses, increases in chronic liver diseases, even though these things had been in decline for 70, 80 years. You're just looking at the misery that has been brought about by the programs that were initiated by this secret society that used MKUltra, that weird CIA project, as one of its major focuses, but then also pops up with feminism, with Gloria Steinem. Mm-hmm. Definitely, when you look at, we did that show and we talked about, how you have the funding sources for Ms. Magazine basically coming right from Operation Mockingbird, the CIA's project to take control of the media. And then you have Clay Felkers, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, when you have him being the person who actually shepherds Ms. Magazine into existence, and then looking back and seeing that he was with Steinem at Helsinki. He was in the original cell that was there to create violence at the Helsinki youth festivals. Well, it's just as clear as a bell, right? That this brand of feminism, which was a feminism that attacked the family, was part of what they were doing. And then at the same time, you have the media, which promotes, starts promoting non-heterosexual, partners. You have, you have both integration and the gay agenda being, promoted in the media. Well, where did this all take us? We have now, I think this is pretty good statistic, that there is something that didn't work out real well for the white male. I would bet that you're going to see these statistics also turn in a bad direction for the white female.
Oh, yeah.
It's just going to take a while longer. They've definitely turned against the African American male.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what was sold as this, almost brave new world, right? How, integration was sold to the black male as something that was really going to, work out great. Well, not if you don't have a family.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't work out great in that context. And so even though all of the moral arguments were correct, I believe, and I think, the people that, saw the welfare state and affirmative action in a positive light, did so, the African Americans, I think they did so, not from, not being able to think clearly. It's just that they didn't see, just as the hippie didn't see, where this was actually going to take them in 20 years. Well, now we know, the single mom and the non-existent mom. I mean, I was looking at these statistics in inner city. I mean, it just breaks your heart, because you've got, not only is the single mom basically it as far as family structure, but there are a lot of children that don't even have mothers. They're actually being raised by other family members, or just, it's just beyond belief. And so, we have been attacked, and so we need, as citizens, it's just like warfare. When you're attacked, you have to organize yourself to defend your existence.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be a very difficult fight, because we're going to be always battling the media. They'll be characterizing the attempt to defend ourselves as sexism, as racism.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll have sophists, clever arguments to get people to see us in that light. But I think when you look at a lump of statistics like this one, Tim, it's pretty hard not to understand that something really evil was lying in back of the cultural changes that we started to see start happening in the 60s and 70s.
I was reading Roger Devlin's book, Sexual Utopia and Power, and his focus is on female behavior. He puts most of the blame on women. The sexual revolution basically was a revolution in female behavior, and since women kind of, when it comes to sex, they have most of the power, they can either create a condition where monogamy is respected, or they can create a condition where serial polygamy is respected. He had a quote. He goes, "Feminism is a movement that thrives on its failures. Hence, it's very difficult to reverse." He's right, because its failures are really, I think, are the secret society's successes. And these feminists are just out there. They're the shock troops. They don't know what the higher. They don't know what the larger agenda is.
I'll give you an example. Betty Friedan.
Mm-hmm.
She basically raised the red flag about Steinem being a CIA agent.
Mm-hmm.
And she was threatened. She was this old line kind of economic Marxist type feminist.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, she's getting, knocks on the door at 1 o'clock in the morning because she had called out Gloria as a CIA agent. Gloria Steinem as a CIA agent is a really important sort of political fact, and it rivals, in my opinion, the fact about Gordon Wasson, having pay requisitions showing that he began, the psychedelic movement, as an MK Ultra subproject, because there just isn't any explanation for the CIA promoting Ms. Magazine, right? Than to basically debase culture, right? I mean, I would just be astounded if they can explain that one away. And so what they're going to have to do basically is quash it, which is what they did. Steinem attempted and was successful in basically not allowing the Red Stockings to bring out the information about her being an agent. And then when she was found out, she went sophist, and then she had these clever arguments, that, well, I'm still a really good person, and the CIA is a very liberal organization. Subsequently, more information just keeps coming out. But I really think that this is an important fact to bring out. I mean, she's still alive. She's still in motion. And you now have a chance to really look at her achievements, right? Because we can really see, she can cite, well, look, we have a lot more abortions now. We have a lot more women in the workforce than ever before. And you know what, Tim? I think it would be a really good idea for her to defend those two things.
Yeah.
Because I think that the average woman would not respond to the reality of what these people have achieved. They could bring these arguments to us, or at least not. I don't even think they would bring these arguments. The abortions, the single moms, the fact that women now have to work and can never really get ahead. These are the kind of the things that come from the philosophy that was put into effect, the legal philosophy. But it was given to women that they were going to feel terrific about themselves, that this was going to be a wonderful world. Like Steinem had this statement, was like, off our backs, was this.
Yeah.
Okay. And this was, sex is horrible. The family's a bad thing. And, you're going to be getting these great jobs because the white male who has the jobs is stupid and not as qualified as we are. And you're really going to enjoy your life. You won't have that boring family anymore, to put up with. Well, now that we've seen the consequence, and women have now had, so many of them, so many of the women from my generation have had lives without husbands. I think that now we would be able to, from a little bit of perspective of experience, answer Steinem's claims about how this is going to be not a worker's paradise, but a feminine paradise. I think most people who basically, in my opinion, were victims of her arguments have become miserable, far more than have enjoyed benefits from the situation. Mm-hmm. Look, everyone is miserable when you have no family. You can, and now, of course, what's going on now is they have, we don't have the male as part of the family, but it's all right because we're lesbians or we're polysexual. They have this pansexual now where they change sexuality. And, I just think that these arguments are obviously perverted, human, kind of lifestyles. They're not, sexually reproductive. But I just think now that enough people have seen, kind of where this has all taken us. And I just think that now is a good time to, to start a counter-offensive against this stuff. It's going to be really tough because cultural Marxists are entrenched everywhere.
Yeah, if you're so concerned about these things, raise concerns about any of these issues, you're immediately accused of, being a racist or a sexist or,
sure.
A phobe of something, a fear of whatever perversion is being promoted now. Homophobe, transphobe, Yeah,
there's so many sexualities that it's hard to keep even the phobes straight, But I just think that there is still a cohort, a large fraction, the largest fraction in our society is a group of men and women that would understand we've been taken off a cliff.
Mm-hmm. Well, a simple thing like no-fault divorce, where I think over 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and there's no penalty for that. And why should they get why should they be able to get support from the man if she initiates the divorce or get custody of the kids? And simple rules like that would inhibit them. But again, another character which would be interesting to look at would be Helen Gurley Brown and her connections. Cosmopolitan magazine, when she wrote "Sex and the Single Girl," promoting. She said women can be sexually aggressive and they go after men who are even married, the most attractive men who are married, and the effect that had is that you have a lot of women chasing an elite group of good-looking men, and that marginalizes the rest of the men. Whereas in the past, in an era of monogamy, women wouldn't have that choice, and there'd be more women out there for men. One of the mistakes of the sexual revolution was they thought because women were looser sexually that there was more sex for men. Actually, it didn't mean that at all. It actually mean less sex, because all it meant was that there were a few men getting a lot of sex, and ultimately a lonely life, I think. But a lot of men were marginalized, and so it was a reverse. It was almost like an embrace of primate mating habits. And don't be surprised if you embrace animal mating habits that society gets degraded into a brute, jungle, and that's what's happening now.
Well, I mean, you look at Eros and Civilization, which basically was saying, don't let anything restrain your sexuality. Sex with lots of women, sex with animals. I mean, there just really wasn't any kind of sex that was a bad idea to old Herbert. And don't let your personal hygiene get in the way, because that's kind of a bad, fascist concept.
Personal hygiene, yeah.
And so you look at this, and you look at Herbert Marcuse, and his, of course, alliance with feminists, and this whole culture Marxism. And you got to go back to Gregor Lucas. I really do think it's something that people just need to automatically do. When you see like the effect, when you see Miley Cyrus, right, and you see her basically trying to mimic a dog, right, having sex on stage, right, and trying to actually, I'm not just talking about the physical motions. I mean her getup. She's actually trying to look like an animal, and she takes her tongue and extends it as far as she can out, just to kind of finish up this bestiality symbolism. So you look at that and you go, okay, well, you can really see Marcuse had a lot of effect. This is part of sex, drugs, rock and roll. Everything looks clear cut. But then you have to remember Marcuse is from the Frankfurt School, and this does come from Gregor Lucas. And so now you can look at Lucas, and you can look at the Bella Kuhn giving old Gregor the control over sex education in Hungary following World War I. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously he had the same perspective as Herbert, or should I say that Herbert was reflecting Lucas's, because he was the founder of the Frankfurt School, which then brings cultural Marxism into America. And so you've got a pretty clear trajectory, not too hard really to follow it, is it, Tim? From Gregor to the Frankfurt School to Herbert, and then into MK Ultra, followed by Miley Cyrus and miming bestiality on the MTV award show. It's just basically, it's not that hard to keep all the connections coherent as you try to go through the trajectory. This didn't happen accidentally, right? It did not. This happened because people who were studying psychology, anthropology, and had control over the media were able to bring it about. So this is the bad news for all of our listeners. This is really bad news because it means that, we have been not only attacked, but attacked in a very sophisticated way. In a way it's going to be really hard to unravel from. But first step is just, I would say just start out with the mortality rate and the causes for the mortality rate of the white male and just start working backwards. Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to end up at Gregor Lucas, right? The proletariat rebellion that Marx envisioned, which was going to basically be the complete destruction of the Christian world, looked like it was going to be a little harder to bring about than they thought. It was just difficult to get these esoteric philosophies widely held enough to get people to go to war over. And so another force came into existence, which is this cultural Marxism.
Yeah, the long march through the institutions. Yeah.
Yeah, the more long march through the institution. Now, it's interesting. Jerry Russell told me that there isn't a cultural Marxist Wikipedia page because whenever they try to get it up, they attack it, and it goes into these complicated referee situations. But he said that basically there is kind of a link to it as a manifestation of the Frankfurt School or something, and
okay,
so
yeah.
but you can see that this is a concept that even though that it's just absolutely self-evident that it exists and that it has this enormous political force, but that they don't want you to do any investigation regarding. It's sort of to me like Gloria Steinem's long-standing project to be a CIA agent, as being a CIA agent, that they don't want this study because it goes straight to the fact that Ms. Magazine and the form of feminism, which was itself a deviation from the long-standing economic feminism that had been in America, that the cultural feminism, which was against the family, right? The feminism that Steinem was talking about, which was promoting abortion, promoting free sex with whoever you wanted, promoted, of course it also had the idea that the women would not have to be suffering a family so they could be in the workforce. But if that feminism could be shown to come from, the CIA, then people would start wondering, well, wait a second. What is the CIA? What has driven this institution to, both create the counterculture and feminism? And once that question becomes widely asked, I think it's just, it's going to be really clear to the population that they wanted to create, basically, a population that would be just so fragmented and impotent that they would have a kind of intellectual dictatorship over it.
Yeah, like in Brave New World, which
exactly right.
Entertained, and also that sex is weaponized to distract everybody. Yeah.
Brave New World, sex and soma, drugs and sex are there just to keep people from realizing that they're slaves. And the drugs and sex work until you don't want to do what you're told to do, which of course in Brave New World isn't going to happen because in the future the oligarchs will have the control over our minds. You won't even have the ability to develop a thought of rebellion or develop the idea that maybe, being a delta is a bad thing. That will never occur because they'll have conditioned it into us, and if there is anxiety, then they give us the drugs. And if we continue, to complain, they'll just execute us. So this is what they've wanted. It's not hard to understand conceptually that this would be the kind of dictatorship permanent technologic dictatorship that would be attractive to the secret society, and it also would go very neatly with the fact that at so many of the points along the way where you see, the dictatorship getting ratcheted up, you see little clumps of anthropologists and psychologists, right? If you look at MK Ultra, you look at the American Jewish Committee, you look at the Frankfurt School, you just have these little clumps of anthropologists. They're studying, they're giving, they don't talk about the agenda, but in fact, it is visible.
Well, they do it through culture. And, the Rand Corporation consulted on Star Trek.
Yeah, I know.
The idea of the UN, they're pushing the UN agenda there. So this is how it's done, and it's not just, crude or overt means, it's subtle through the culture. And that's why, I mentioned Helen Gurley Brown and Cosmopolitan and how that affected female sexuality, promoting female irresponsible sexual behavior. The whole idea of, the male sexuality being evil. That's the whole date rape, hysteria thing that kicked in the, I guess at the 80s or 90s, more than the 90s, I guess. But you could create a condition you do in your typical college campus and not expect that problem to occur. Obviously, that problem is going to occur. In fact, that's why it was. If you create co-ed dorms and you create a situation where teenagers are sent away from home,
and promote alcohol and drug use by the entire population, and then you stand in horror and go, "Oh my God, how did this happen?"
It's disingenuous. That's the worst thing.
Well, there are rapes because the condition by which they can occur, the culture by which they can occur, is the most powerful one. And so you can't try to just go after the symptom of the cultural degradation. See, I think this is what you're getting, and I'm sorry to have stepped on your point here, but it's just, you're not going to affect any change with, draconian, punishments. I mean, obviously, believe me, rape is just the most destructive crime that exists.
Yeah, so you shouldn't trivialize it by creating different categories.
Right.
Now it's date rape.
You shouldn't permit a culture, where you have same-sex dorms, right? That's why you had separate sex dorms.
Yeah, you had to, like, if you old movies where you're meeting a girl, she had to come down and meet you, and and there's and one thing is, another point that Roger Devlin made in Sexual Utopian Power is that there's an idea that the more you see girls, the more likely you have sex. Well, actually, that's not the way it works, because the familiarity will disillusion you about each other, and you end up not liking each other as much. Whereas if you only saw a guy once or twice a week or at the dance, gives you a chance to get to know him and also idolize him a little bit. So there's some chance for romance there. Well, this whole notion of breakdown of modesty is ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, all these things, but I mean, the debutante culture produced families. Say what you want about its artificiality, it sure was statistically a success, right?
Yeah.
So now you have, well, gee, look, we're so liberated, and you have no families.
Well, compare the debutante ball to hooking up. Which would you prefer?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is more disgusting? Come on.
And the thing is that's a question that should be presented to women because that's really the dichotomy that was given to them by Steinem, right? Steinem talks about, hey, it's, have sex the way you want it and under your terms, right? Okay, forget the debutante culture. That's for slaves, right? But the problem is you end up with sex with dozens of men and no husband, and that that's not something that women really wanted. So we talked about this in the last show that you just have to go backwards. You've got to. We've seen what has happened. We've seen the groups that have brought the weaponized anthropology. We know what our culture was like. I know it was square. I know a lot of people were unhappy with its effects. You know, there was racial discrimination. Mm-hmm. There was stuff that was really unfair for women. But we need to try to fix our culture, these problems, in the context of retaining a culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. If racial discrimination didn't mean that ethnic identity was wrong, nor did it mean that, or male authority in a family, just because there are some incidents, women may have been discriminated against or treated poorly at times, or doesn't mean that male authority is wrong in a family. It's like you take the worst example of something and then say, throw it out. That's ridiculous. Well, are women really better off without husbands? Are children really better off without fathers? Well, the thing is, they think so because it's not about the children. It's about, ultimately it's about depopulation and genocide. So
right, and of course, that's right. You see, I actually have a theory. Of course, I'm old-fashioned, but I think one of the reasons why they initiated, the MK Ultra counterculture and feminism is that the culture was getting close to really being a kind of utopia. In other words, if you'd taken the 1950 culture and had continued a lot of the trajectories that are visible in the statistics, I think you would have had a socialization. I think the males would have been, the fraction that were too dominant could have been brought into a better orbit. I think that the lack of kind of intellectual activity that some women were seeing, inside of marriages, I think this could have been addressed. In other words, the problems that we had, I think, were going to get solved, and I think they knew it. They could see the trajectories, and they could go, wait a second, these people won't be controllable. Look at the indices for the black family from 1945 to 1960. Everything was improving. That's right.
Even crime rate. People think that crime rates are endemic to black culture. You hear that argument made all the time. Well, the tail off, the collapse began in the mid '60s. It's relatively recent, really, if you think about it. There wasn't I think Irish had a higher illegitimacy rate and crime rate than blacks did up until the middle of the century.
I think I told the story. Yeah,
But they didn't want that to happen. They didn't want that because it was occurring without any social engineering.
Exactly. It was the people just improving themselves and heading and trying to take our world, the world that, in other words, our lives, into a place where there would be peace and happiness. Mm-hmm. We could see we were moving in this direction, right? Everyone could feel it. I remember in the 50s. What it was like. And I think that the African American really had that strong sense. And so the next thing you know, it isn't just that the African American family gets hit with, the welfare state, which takes the male out of the, he doesn't produce the income anymore, and separates him from the family. Mm-hmm. But then you also have the, pimp culture being glamorized. Right. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to be getting a lot of now males with single moms. And then at the same time, I think that the drugs that were brought into the inner city were done so deliberately. Yeah. And by the same people who were producing MK Ultra counterculture. And so now you've had this combination that now creates, at the same time that jobs are starting to leave en masse from manufacturing jobs that could have been available to inner city kids. I mean, it's just tragic when you think about what they did to them. Mm-hmm. How they outsourced the manufacturing job, they insourced the drug culture, right? They promoted the pimp as the pimp concept as kind of a glamorous, valuable thing for them to head to. And then they separated they atomized the family. They got rid of the father. And so now, 60 years later, 50 years later, you can see the result.
Mm-hmm. Look at Detroit. I mean, geez.
That's right.
One of the most beautiful cities.
Yeah.
At one point, and there's just destroyed a lot of them was municipal corruption, union corruption, but also there was a broader agenda there at play. And if you mentioned the integration was weaponized, given the cover of racial integration and justice and all that. But they were used as proxies. The mass migration north to weaken the unions, and the same reason that women were mobilized in the 70s, so ultimately in the 80s they could flood the job market and lower wages.
Yeah. And something I learned from you, which was really had a strong effect on me, is that the white middle class was deracinated deliberately, right? They couldn't move, to kind of integration with other races. So they took these neighborhoods and moved them all into a deracinated white middle class state. And they knew that was a step toward basically being able to get rid of the ethnicity altogether.
Yeah.
It was like a halfway point that they took the ethnic, the Italian, Polish, Irish, German, all of the ethnic neighborhoods that had the extended families. They got pushed out into this deracinated white middle class suburb. And the kids then were basically vulnerable to the pornographic culture. Yeah,
the deal here in America prior, I guess, in the middle part of the 20th century on up into the middle part of the 20th century, till right after the Second World War, was that ethnic Germans would come here, Poles would come here, Irish would come here, and they'd become Americanized to a certain extent, but they retain a huge portion of their ethnic identity, and they become Irish Americans, German Americans, in these ethnic enclaves. And so America was an archipelago of different ethnic areas, and that was probably the best that's probably what you really want, because that way you have community, you have family, you have whether it's the parish, the extended family, and you work in the area, but they didn't want that. They had a Cold War agenda. They wanted, it was the American century. They needed to destroy that. And they were able to exploit real problems like the racial problems, but you don't solve racial problems by shipping. I think it was like in a 6-month period in World War II, they shipped like 200,000 former black sharecroppers and dumped them into right near Detroit in a Polish neighborhood. And what do you think's gonna? Don't give them housing accommodation when you could have built housing elsewhere and had their own little community. It wouldn't be a problem. It was designed to create a problem, and it was exposed in the 70s that Sergeant Shriver, when he was head of the economic employment, the Office of Economic Opportunity, one of these boondoggles of the 60s, that they had given almost $1 million to this black gang, the Blackstone Rangers, and they knew they were criminals. The idea was this was to chase the whites out, to make it life unlivable. So don't give me this racial integration BS. It's not. I mean, and not to mention the fact that it's an insult to every ethnic group. Everyone has to meld together, to be of any value. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, I think integration was a goal, because ultimately they wanted a completely deracinated Delta class, like Brave New World. That was the goal, but that wasn't the integration that they were selling people in the 70s, the values that they were claiming for it. I mean, it was, again, just the population didn't have the capacity to defend itself because it did not suspect malfeasance.
Yes, and then people still don't. It's almost like
they still don't,
today, whether it's this weaponized, the aggressive gay agenda, which is no longer just let us be, leave us alone. It's aggressive, and people don't realize how it's being actively promoted within the schools, the whole thing with the media, and it's not just some uncoordinated culmination of events. No, it's a weapon. It's a weapon that's being pointed at you. The broader weaponization of culture that most people, give an example like the suburbs, how this was done. Is you get them in the suburbs, and then this lasts maybe a generation, and then the economy turns sour, and in order to support that suburban lifestyle, you need two incomes. And now with mommy out of the house and kids coming home to an empty house, they watch cable television, they watch MTV, and they're taken in by the vampires at MTV.
name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti